I previously owned a Porsche Taycan Turbo S, and today we're going to find out how much money I would have lost if I still owned it. And believe me, it is terrifying. The Taycan has quickly become infamous for hefty depreciation, and mine being the flagship from the range had potential for even more disaster too. I've lost a lot of money on cars like my Mercedes AMGs and McLaren Senna, but let's figure out why this is happening so badly for the Taycan and dig into what it did cost and what it would have cost me if I still owned it today. Hi guys, I'm Shmee, hello and welcome back to the channel. Let's talk Taycan. Don't get me wrong, the Taycan is a fantastic car. In fact, back at the time we moved into the Shmuseum, mine was my go-to daily driver for here in the UK, lots of different journeys, and even a road trip that I took it on all the way to Germany and back. But today I want to talk about values of Taycans and electric cars in general, and what's happening with this industry. Plus, there might be some other cars in my collection which have a pretty unfriendly future of depreciation in store for them down the line. But the Taycan was Porsche's first full electric car. They are now making most of their lineup fully electric, and that's having interesting shake-ups to the industry, but also the fact that governments are requiring manufacturers to go basically fully electric in not very long, yet sales aren't really there. 2 + 2 is currently not equaling 4, so what's going to be happening next with this? My only current Porsche is this, my 914, which is a small fraction here and the rest at Yorkshire Car Restoration currently being worked on. The guys are doing some amazing stuff with that. But the Taycan, of course, launched, in fact, back in 2015. The Mission E concept was shown at the Frankfurt Motor Show. I filmed it back there. In fact, it then arrived in pretty similar form in production spec. I have a model of it here. In 2019, Porsche introduced their first fully electric car, the Saloon, large form factor, boasting, if you had Turbo S spec, 760 horsepower, which is utterly bonkers. To be honest, it took the entire market by storm, because up to this point, all of your electric cars, the likes of the Tesla Model S and different models that have arrived, had all been, for purist car drivers, a little bit of a curveball, not the same driving experience you'd come to expect. But the Taycan has been a Porsche through and through. It feels like a Porsche, it drives like a Porsche, it just happens to be powered by electricity as opposed to petrol or diesel. Let me recap my Taycan, the Turbo S, the flagship, but stay tuned because I can reveal some pretty scary numbers to you in a moment. So I bought a car when it was fairly early in its life. I actually bought a car that had been pre-spec'd. I didn't choose the specification, but there weren't a whole lot of them available because this was right at the early stage of customer cars being delivered. I took delivery in grey with the dual tone wheels like the Mission E at Porsche Hatfield, but very promptly took it to Dove Customs to wrap the car in midnight green. The CTEK film looked amazing, especially after we then took those wheels to Whoops We'll Fix It to paint them in aurum gold. Green and gold is a winning combination, especially given the car also had some gold accents on the interior. We then had a lot of fun with it in the year and a bit that I owned it after that point. We did some drag races against the McLaren Senna, smoked it off the line before the Senna did, as you might expect, eventually start to catch up, being about 1,000 kilos lighter. Also took it via the Nürburgring. Yes, I did an electric lap of the Nürburgring Nordschleife in the Porsche Taycan Turbo S as well. But the car fundamentally was flawed from the point of view that if you buy the most performance variant of an EV, you tend to have the least range. It's not something that you can have the best of both worlds, and that turned out to be a bit of a problem down the line, as we're going to get to. I've been very lucky that some of the cars I've bought over the years have appreciated in value, although I tend not to have sold those, the likes of my SLS AMG Black Series, my Ford GT, even the Focus RS and the GT500. But I've also owned quite a few that have plummeted off the edge of a cliff. And I stand in front of the GT Black Series not because of this car, but this car's predecessors. My original AMG GTR, the Beast of the Black Hell, which depreciated from buying to selling by £53,000. My AMG GTR Pro that came next, which depreciated from buying to selling by £55,000. My AMG GTR Roadster that came after, which also depreciated from buying to selling by £50,000. Terrifying to think that those 3 cars alone cost over £150,000 in depreciation, not including servicing, finance interest, other costs involved in running them as well. Of course, the plus side is that I'm making videos and other things going on, but that wasn't a particularly friendly set of bills. In fact, I did an update fully talking through all of these cars that I've owned to date, the ones that have lost, the ones that have made money, what's happened along the way. Another, without giving you specifics, has been the McLaren Senna. Often people think hypercars only make you money. Whether the Senna is a hypercar or not is a separate discussion, but having bought it for over £800,000 back at the time, we sold it earlier in the year with an asking price of £660,000. So you can probably do the simple maths behind that one. However, you kind of expected a little bit more on those types of cars. The direction that EVs have gone is the really, really, really scary one. Who actually buys a car like the Porsche Taycan? And I find this very interesting, so let's explain. And to do so, I am starting here in my daily spaces at the garage, because we have the world's best daily right here, the Telemagenta bright pink Transit Custom from MSRT. This is our team van, and it is amazing. But more realistically, I'm currently dailying the newest addition to the collection, the Ferrari Roma Spider, getting that early running in mileage done, getting it ready for some fun ahead, and very lucky to do so. But back at the time of moving in, as I said, I owned the Taycan. Now, back then, I lived in central London with an underground garage with no opportunity to have a charging station there. I couldn't plug it in anywhere, it wasn't allowed. If I then went to the chargers, firstly, they were quite a long way away. Secondly, you'd probably end up with queues before you were able to get to the front. Then if you did get to the front, they were potentially broken, as I encountered many times. If they were working, they were incredibly expensive. So when we moved in here, as you can imagine, we installed an EV charger. Very luckily, here we have 3-phase electricity, so the CTEK Chargestorm Connected 2 can power 2 cars and charge 22 kilowatts, which means a car like the Taycan could go from nearly empty to nearly full in 5 or 6 hours. Come in for the day, plug it in when it's nearly empty, it would be full at the end of the day. Complete change to the use case of a car like that and how I could actually enjoy owning it. Not so many people in the country are fortunate enough to have such charging infrastructure, have to rely on public chargers, which are a nightmare, or have to park on the street and can't plug it in, which is its own problem. So who buys one? Well, this is where all the tax benefits come in. If you are a business owner, you can buy an electric car, a premium EV, a very expensive car, and write it down at 100% of its value. Think about that. A Taycan at £160,000, instant write-off. Of course, when you come to selling it, you have to add back on the value that you sell it for, a little bit more complicated than that. And having not expected that the whole world would fall out from under the value's feet of a Taycan, I actually didn't do that at the time because nobody expected it to go completely off the cliff like that. Anyway, a little bit more complicated because every country is different. Even within countries, every setup is different, but with all sorts of company tax breaks, advantages to do so, there's been a big push towards EVs, which has driven those who are quite wealthy and fortunate to do so to buy the most expensive EVs, and therefore you can imagine where this is going. You only get that break when you buy it new, not used. Are you going to buy a used one? Not really. Used values as a result, woof, off they went. The cost of charging is fascinating. So being lucky here on a farm, we've got fixed tariffs, I've got my charger installed, it's very cheap and effective to charge up an electric car. If you don't have that, you're relying on the public infrastructure, which here in the United Kingdom currently costs you in the region of about 80 to 85 pence per kilowatt. Now in a car like the Taycan Turbo S, a 760 horsepower, very high-end, heavy electric car, that will get you 2 and a little bit miles. For some perspective, to fuel my Ferrari GTC4Lusso back at the time, similarly powered 12-cylinder Ferrari supercar, luxury high-end 4-seater car, cost in the region of £1.50 a litre, which gets you about 4 to 5 miles. If you do the maths on that, it's actually cheaper to fuel a V12 Ferrari than to charge an electric car that's equivalent. Not only that, the petrol includes fuel duty, includes a whole lot of other taxes, whereas the electric side doesn't yet. Think about that. Take off or add that fuel duty to electric car charging. It's actually significantly more expensive to charge an electric car than to fuel a Ferrari. What I've just given you is this really long list of reasons why EVs are a disaster. The cost of electricity, how hard it is to charge them, the huge depreciation of cars. And I sound like a complete EV hater, but I want to say I'm not anti-EVs. I've run a number of different electric cars, and it's all down to the right time and place. For example, if you're commuting, going from A to B and you've got easy access to a charger, it's a no-brainer. If you're driving into a city centre where pollution is a problem, we all know that, again, it's a no-brainer. If you want a luxurious, comfortable, calm, effortless drive, Rolls-Royce Spectre, I'm looking at you, again, it's a no-brainer. But what's happened is that governments and media have created this very confusing, often misunderstood environment around EVs to begin with, and somebody like Harry Metcalf has done an amazing video about this that I recommend you watch to understand it more. But effectively now we're in this strange world where manufacturers have spent billions on R&D to develop electric cars that now customers aren't really buying in the numbers that were either expected or are required by legislation. We've heard many things like electric cars only from 2030 or 2035 in different regions. Even Volvo Cars, who pretty much have led one of the charges on this, have recently announced that they're not going to be able to make their own targets. Because if customers aren't buying the electric cars, manufacturers still need to develop the combustion engine cars to keep sales going, to keep the business afloat, with the electric cars effectively having to somehow subsidize all of this. It's a very complicated economic situation that a lot of people don't really understand, even down to, are electric cars actually better given the cost of manufacturing? We've talked a little bit about that in the past on the channel. Really complex, really difficult to understand, but it's meant that all of these high-end EVs that have now flooded to the market as people want to go back to another combustion engine car, maybe it's even cheaper, maybe they want a new car, maybe they don't want to buy another car that's going to depreciate so heavily, and now left there with nobody really buying them, and the cars as a result have done this. With brands like Porsche or Ferrari, when it comes to the really special cars, generally, if you want to get the ultimate limited edition track-focused version, you need to have owned some of the other stuff as well. To get the SF90 XX, I needed to have owned an SF90 before that. With Porsche, it's been known for a very long time that if you want to get a new GT3 RS, you need to have bought some of the regular cars.
Looks like we've got a GT3 RS, but I have got to sweeten the deal with buying 3 Porsche Taycans now.
So with Porsche now changing the lineup, the portfolio, to be the Taycan, the new fully electric Macan, we know the fully electric Boxster Cayman platform is coming, the Cayenne is going fully electric as well. All of these are losing their combustion engine cars completely. If you want a Porsche GT car, like the next 911 GT3 RS, GT2 RS, or whatever it might be, you're probably going to need to buy a bunch of these cars that you really don't want. And that creates a very strange marketing position. I would argue that, at least in the case of the cars from Maranello, all of the cars that they make are amazing. So when you buy a 296 or a Roma or a Purosangue, you're driving an amazing car that as an enthusiast you want, but they're going to have a similar problem as well when they do eventually release a full EV. And I'm looking forward to seeing what happens with that. There'll be more on the channel, I'm sure, about it down the line. We'll have to wait and see. We don't know yet. But it certainly is going to create this friction in the portfolios. What's going to happen if you want the ultimate GT car? Are you going to have to go and buy a bunch of stuff that you really don't want to get it? Ladies and gentlemen, are you sitting down? Because I certainly needed to share some of these numbers with you. Back in late 2020, I sold my first Ferrari GTC4Lusso, the V12, to purchase my Porsche Taycan. I bought it in November 2020, less than 4 years ago. Remember that. With 11 miles on the clock, brand spanking new, first owner on the car. And it cost me £159,563, 160 grand for the Taycan, a whole lot of money. And at the time, I didn't think they would fall as far as they have done since. I actually then owned the car for about 18 months. I sold it in November 2022 with 6,572 miles on the clock. So I did 6,500 miles and I sold it for £138,000 on the nose. I lost £21,500 on my Taycan Turbo S, which sounds horrific. It's a lot of money, but compared to what I'm about to tell you, I got very lucky with that. Fast forward to today, current market, cars that are less than 4 years old, that were £160,000 new with a high spec, admittedly. If you go to Auto Trader, one of the UK's biggest platforms for these kinds of cars, and look for the Porsche Taycan Turbo S only, the cheapest Taycan Turbo S right now is asking, so not even what you would actually necessarily pay, it's asking £58,000, a loss of 2/3 in less than 4 years. 100 grand down. Now, realistically, my car, obviously with some slightly lower mileage and higher spec, would be somewhere in the low mid 60s, but still effectively £100,000 down. If I had never driven it again and kept it at 6,500 miles, it might stretch towards 70, but still over 90 grand down. As it happens, I sold my Taycan Turbo S to purchase another Ferrari GTC4Lusso. I stepped back into Ferrari's V12 Grand Tourer. But think about those numbers. That's a lot to lose. In fact, bar the Senna, that would have been to today the most I had lost on a car, a single car ever, with the exception of the SF90 Stradale, which I know will lose more than 100, except there's one big difference. The SF90 at least has been, well, both cars we're going to say are an amazing experience to own, but the SF90 at least ticks some boxes with Ferrari, gets me some points. The Taycan did absolutely zero when it comes to Porsche, because the next guy who comes in and buys more cars is going to step right above you in the queue. I wanted a GT4 RS at the time, bought my Taycan, bought a GT4 in fact from the same dealer as well, but that's not even enough to make a Porsche dealer blink in terms of cars for the future. So that's a lot of money to lose for not necessarily all that much. Something I didn't mention, take out the Turbo S for a moment. Let's talk about all Porsche Taycans, including those at a lower entry price point like the 4S. You can now get one that's 4 years old, starting from under £40,000. At that price, it is the bargain of the century. A luxurious, comfortable performance car that's a small fraction of the cost for the original owner. The reason, though, is that it's hampered by all of these fears of EVs in general. Is the battery deteriorating? Is it going to need an expensive replacement? Is the car still depreciating very heavily, or even going to become completely worthless? Beyond that, also, here in the United Kingdom especially, nearly every car is purchased with some form of finance. So finance quotes are going to impact decisions. If you take electric cars with lower residual values than their equivalent internal combustion engine car, that means the monthly payments are going to be a little bit higher to equate for that difference, which means people are going to lean in the other direction. In the last few years, sales of electric cars as a percentage of the total have been rising exponentially pretty much everywhere. In the last year or so, that has begun to taper off quite significantly against the expectations of governments, car manufacturers, organizations who monitor all of this type of thing. And there are a few reasons for it. Of course, this is very specific to different regions. In a country like Norway, they have nearly 100% uptake of new cars being fully electric. And the reasons for that are nice tax breaks, extra taxes that apply to internal combustion engine cars, and renewable energy sources found at home, which is something that's very topical itself, a whole other discussion point. We don't have quite the same rate here. Different countries will have different answers to that one. We're not going to go too much into it right now. There's similarly, though, been an increase at the same time of the sales of hybrid cars. And while I'm lucky to drive some performance hybrids, we're obviously talking about the more mainstream stuff. But what's interesting even with these is that I can actually drive from here to home and back in full electric, even with a very small battery. That means, quite amusingly, if I go for a drive, the car's been driven, but the engine hasn't even been started, so the fluids haven't gone through, and you could argue it hasn't actually been driven in terms of keeping it regularly maintained, etc. But if people remember to plug in, you can charge very cheaply overnight at home and have that small range for the short journeys, or at least the start of each journey that you do. Against that, there is obviously the weight penalty of lugging around a battery and some motors in a hybrid, but they've grown because people then don't have the fear of, will I find a charger that works? Am I going to get completely stuck somewhere with no ability to fix it? Because with a petrol car, you can go to the nearest petrol station, gas station, get a jerry can and just fill up 5 litres, right? A gallon or so, and on your way you go to the next one and solve that problem. With an electric car, you can't just plug it into your power bank that you use for your mobile phone and charge the car up very quickly. That's not going to be a solution. This is all changing so quickly, and there are so many elements. Tax breaks are going to be cut, right? That's going to be gone soon. That means manufacturers who have spent billions, pretty much every manufacturer has spent billions because they've been told they have to sell full electric cars by 2030, by 2035, whatever it is. All of the cars in their portfolio have to be electric. They've been pointing in that direction. But if customers don't buy those cars, what's going to happen here? There's going to be a limited number of internal combustion engine cars that are then going to have sky-high premiums in comparison to their electric equivalents to make sure that it works on the market. I struggle to understand where this is going, but something has to back down. The downside of that is, if you think about it, when it comes to any of these newer cars, engine development has almost stagnated. They've not been spending money on it because everyone said it had to end. It had to be gone within 5 years, within 10 years. No consideration for synthetic and e-fuels, which is, again, another topic to discuss. As a result, engines that could have improved in terms of weight, in terms of size, in terms of efficiency, fuel economy, haven't done, because what was the reason to do so? So we've almost stifled, in my opinion, the development of the combustion engine in recent years because nobody could really justify it. And I could waffle on for hours and hours and hours about all of these topics, but there are so many complex elements of each one that differ from each individual person, each individual country, each individual manufacturer even, how they work. Ferrari is a much smaller manufacturer, whereas Lamborghini are part of Audi and the Volkswagen group, and different rules that apply based on different production numbers, whether it's series production or even limited production. Limited number production runs don't generally count inside the total company's output of vehicles that they produce in a given year. All of these very, very, very complicated elements that come together. Ultimately, that means, as a result, and the Taycan has, unfortunately for Porsche, become the poster child of this, that high-value EVs that were bought over the last couple of years have absolutely crashed, tanked in market value because of the fact there were so many tax breaks for the wealthy people that could buy them individually at the beginning of this, that nowadays the market determination or interest in those products just isn't there as it was. It remains to be seen with Porsche, with most of the lineup going electric, what's that going to mean? Of course, they're going to be great cars, but if they depreciate a lot, it puts people off buying them. Think about the time when you could buy a GT3 RS 4-litre under list price because there wasn't the demand for it. As soon as people know it makes money, more people want to buy it, and it goes the same the other way as well. As soon as everybody knows it loses a lot, fewer people want to take that bite and go for it. It's always been the case with luxury S-classes and 7 Series, but not to that extent, not that much, that quickly. And that's the very scary thing about it all. So I hope this has almost opened some more questions. Maybe we'll have a follow-up topic. Do go check out Harry's video as well, talking about all of this, and plenty of other people who have covered the topic also. But for now, that is all. Thank you very much for watching, guys. It was a pretty steep pill to swallow, a big pill to swallow when it comes to the Taycan, but it would have been way worse if it had stayed here at the Shmuseum up to this point. That's it for now, though. I'll see you again very soon. Cheers.